Buffalo soldier in the 1800s from the deserts of New Mexico came a brand new soldier. Indians called him Buffalo. Stories told of their valor bold, how this black man came to be. He was a hard-riding hero from the 10th Cavalry. Said he was a buffalo soldier. Said he was a buffalo soldier. Well, he lived and he died and he bled for this land. All he ever wanted was to be called a man. He was a buffalo soldier.
Today we're here to rededicate the memorial grove here at Savenac Nursery in memory of those who lost their lives during the 1910 fires. 78 fires and a total of 86 people lost their lives here 100 years ago. These people were recent immigrants, transients, inmates, and untrained local citizens. They were asked to go into the forest where the number, size, and intensity of the fires that awaited them was unknown and unlike anything they had ever seen before. They were asked to go and fight these fires with little or no training. Many years after the Great Burn, the regional office of the Forest Service in Missoula decided to create a living memorial to honor the 75 firefighters that lost their lives in the 1910 fires. And they chose the site of the Savenac Nursery because it was certainly the premier, or one of the premier nurseries within the National Forest System. So in 1938, the region chartered the Civilian Conservation Corps, known as the CCCs, those folks that were stationed here at Savenac with designing the living memorial and constructing a monument and a bronze plaque. 78 spruce trees, most of which are still alive, as you see in front of you and behind me, were planted in the Arboretum, one for each of the 78 firefighters who perished. About a year later, the search was on for a stone that would be respectfully large in stature and pleasing to the eye. The CCCs searched all summer for such a stone. They looked from the 9 Mile Valley to Lookout Pass. They finally found this massive rock right here to my right, to your left. That's way up Silver Creek, which is located on the other side of I-90 in Saltese. So the first thing they had to do was figure out a way to get their old truck up to the site, which they did. The second thing they had to figure out was how to get the rock into the truck, which obviously they did as well. I'm not sure there's any written history about how that happened, but they were pretty ingenious, and they did make it happen. They brought the rock back down to Savenac and moved it to the location that they wanted. The rock was so large, however, that it didn't take too long to notice that their perfect rock was so heavy that it was sinking. So with pulleys, levers, and jacks, they raised the mighty boulder and poured a concrete base underneath it. I'm told you can only see about a third to a half of the rock today, of its original size. I would just like to truly, from the bottom of my heart, thank every firefighter, past, present, and future, for the commitments that you've made, the sacrifices that you've made, the Vienna sausage sandwiches, the green eggs and ham, the being away from your family, the dangerous situations that you've put yourself in. I would truly like to thank you for that sacrifice and that commitment. All firefighters, past, present, and future, have given a large part of their lives, and unfortunately some have given their lives, and that's certainly the most heroic thing that one can do. We all certainly owe them a debt of gratitude, and really need to thank them for all of their skill and professionalism. So for that, I would like you to help me join in thanking them.
Long before there were telephones and radios in use in America, the bell was used to sound fire alarms. When a firefighter fell in the line of duty, an officer would tap out a special signal. Listen now for the sounding of the traditional 333 in recognition of and to honor those firefighters who gave their lives during the fires of 1910.
That 100 years ago, the cold front passage, a Palouse, the old-timers called it, started blowing from the Palouse country in southeast Washington. These strong south-southwest winds are said to have attained hurricane force by the time they reached North Idaho. Hundreds, if not thousands, of fires coalesced into a catastrophic firestorm that had not been witnessed before or since August 20th, 1910. These men came from lumber camps, mines, saloons, railroads, and jails. And I quote, "Yet the fact remains that those polyglot mobs, mocked and maligned, bore the brunt of these fires, led by rangers, their ranks stiffened by competent foremen and loggers. They built the trails. They slapped down flames with shovelfuls of dirt. They set backfires. They died. Of those who perished in flame that summer, not one was a soldier, not one was a ranger." And that's out of Dr. Pine's book, The Year of the Great Fires.
We were an agency with barely 5 years of experience under us, and we were fairly new to our communities. On top of that, people weren't really even sure they wanted public land or they wanted something called the Forest Service. There was a lot of questions that summer when all those fires began to erupt. And I think the major thing is that as those stories are passed from generation to generation, and we look back this summer, we reread Stephen Pine's book, or we read Tim Egan's book, or we see a movie or a photo, it reminds us what really truly is important. I look at the landscapes and I know and I read the stories and accounts about what it touched to the communities, to the agency and public lands in general. And most important, I can look back and I can see these forests are green again. The wildlife has returned and cities have rebuilt. But the biggest sacrifice is one firefighter too many was lost that day. And so I believe in this moment when we're here today to join our hands as communities, as partners, and maybe as family, that we truly are looking at the tragedy of these fires and the sacrifice of that human life. And this new cemetery sign, I hope, will give us a moment to remember not only the bravery, but the longevity of coming out of the ash once that fire was settled, and the regrowth that it took, but the more than anything, that we turn and look at the men that are buried here today and honor them.
The narrative legacy of the Great Fires explains much of why the American fire scene looks the way it does. But it does not explain what that scene ought to look like. It does not tell us what we should do. For this, we need a new narrative, one that does not begin in August 1910, nor end with the apparent irony that by honoring the victims of the big blow-up, we are perversely celebrating a massively wrong turn in American environmental history. We don't need to scrap the old narrative. It's too good, and as we can see around us, it may be indispensable. For those fires burned in a moral universe no less than in the mountains. Their story reminds us that we live in a world about which we know only a little, in a world in which we must act, which is to say, in a world for which character, for which hubris, recklessness, tenacity, courage, wisdom, loyalty matter more than rates of spread and fireline intensity. So even as we retell the epic, we should recognize that we need to fashion another story, one equally compelling and convincing, to add to it. And in this regard, the Great Fires can once again instruct, for they tell us what it takes to embed a fire in a culture in ways that make a narrative that can both inform and inspire. It took years, then decades, and now nearly a century to create suitable memorials for those who fought the fires. These sites bear witness to how the Great Fires of 1910 engaged their times. The story of how Americans and their fires interact today has not yet gelled into a comparable story. A century hence, let us hope we will have crafted such a narrative, a testimonial better suited to the complex relationship we have with our land, not one dominated by metaphors of fighting and dying, but of working with, renewing, and regenerating. Today, we honor those who fell in answering a call to arms and adventure. Tomorrow, we can hope such calls will indeed be a thing of the past.
In recognition of the fallen firefighters.
You see these Pulaskis down here? His name lives on everybody who fights wildfire. Ed Pulaski. He's a man of many jobs and many talents, kind of a Renaissance man, a blacksmith, a westerner, a horseman, someone who'd kicked around the mines, someone who'd kicked around timber operations, someone who tried a little farming, someone who was on his second marriage, and then he was middle-aged when everybody else in the Forest Service was a graduate of Yale or had come out of one of these East Coast schools. And like other rangers, he patrolled, on average, each ranger had 900,000 acres per ranger. That was their beat. Almost 1 million acres per ranger. And for this, they were paid less than $100 a month. Now we know on the Friday, as these other fires were merging and this thing was starting to blow up, and the worst of all things was happening, the wind was kicking up, that Ed Pulaski came down to this town to see his wife and his daughter, Elsie. And they spoke, and they wondered what to do. Now Pulaski had a choice that I hope none of us will ever have to make in our lives. They knew this town was going to burn. They knew this valley was going to be full of flame and full of smoke. They didn't know the level of the horror. They knew you might not even be able to escape. That getting on one of the 2 trains out of town might be certain death because the trestles themselves were on fire. But Ed Pulaski had a choice. He could stay with his wife and Elsie, stay with his family, or go back up here into these hills with his men who were scattered then across the ridges. People who were scared, people who did not think they were going to come here from Greece or England to die in this flame. And what did Pulaski do? He kissed his wife and his daughter goodbye, and he made that choice to go back with his men. So, having done that, we also know that he did one of the most historic things that anyone has ever done in fighting a wildfire. As trees fell all around them, as the wind kicked up, as the day itself became dark, pitch black in places where you couldn't see, as people gagged on smoke, as horses bucked their riders off and some of their tails were burned, as flames caught men in the face and they cried on the spot thinking they were going to die in these mountains, and many did, Pulaski directed these people to a mine shaft. Now, if you haven't visited this mine shaft, I urge you to do it. They have a wonderful trail up there. Those of you who are out of town, I've walked these stations of the cross. It's one of the most extraordinary historic places where you really feel what went on there. And that's where he saved nearly 50 men's lives, the lives of nearly 50 men. He even gave up his horse to an overweight Texan who said he could not travel anymore. Pulaski gave him his horse. So, for a brief time afterward, Pulaski survived. Most of his men survived. They were down in the hospitals of Wallace. For a brief time, 24 hours, maybe 48 hours at the most, the eyes of the Western world were on this valley. All the East Coast newspapers reported on it. The New York Times had it on its front page. The president himself was getting daily updates from his summer home in Massachusetts. The eyes of the world were on this place. And then they fell away, never to come back. And Wallace disappeared in the annals of time. And people largely forgot about the Big Burn. The one man did not, Ed Pulaski. He felt bad that they had not taken care of the dead. He felt that the dead had not been properly honored, that their graves were out in the woods and that weeds were growing up around these people who had died, that people were going to forget, and many who had burned did not have their wounds taken care of. Pulaski himself died a relatively bitter man, feeling that the dead from this fire, from the Big Burn, the biggest wildfire in American history, in our recorded history, that these dead deserved better, and so did he. And I'm here to tell you, it's my belief, seeing how this valley has responded, how the Forest Service has responded, how the people of the Pacific Northwest who have a young history but love their history have responded, that we have now given those dead the honor they deserve.
Buffalo soldier, will you survive in this new land? Buffalo soldier, buffalo soldier, tell me when When will they call you a man? Thank you for your time today.